Good evening. Let's go ahead and get started tonight. Let's stand, and we'll open with the word of prayer, and then we'll get into our course books tonight. All right. Seth, you want to open us in prayer tonight, please?
Lord, I thank you for this day that you've given to us, bringing us all together to hear from your word and learn together. I pray that you just give us a good night, digging into your word and worshiping you. In your name, amen.
Amen. Let's go ahead and turn to number 27 in your course book. Number 27, Jesus is a Wonderful Savior. Number 27. You may be seated. Do have a couple of announcements. If you can tonight, they're going to hopefully show our building again on Friday. So we just need to make sure everything gets straightened up before everybody leaves and make it presentable for a walkthrough. I don't know if it's the same people or not, because a realtor had called to set up the walkthrough. Now, I know the people that looked at it before had allegedly gotten a realtor, so I don't know. But if they have, that means that the realtor will be communicating with ours, and hopefully we'll have some better open communications. If not, it's somebody else that's interested. So anyway, at least interested enough to look at it. So be praying about that, and then if you can help, just straighten things up after, that would be greatly appreciated. Friday night, we will have our last cottage prayer meeting, and that will be at Helen and Vicky's house at 7 o'clock. Friday at 7. And then Saturday morning at 9, we'll have our church prayer meeting, soul winning visitation following that. And then Sunday, our anniversary service. We've been praying for it. We've been looking forward to it. We'll have one service in the morning at 10 o'clock. Inevitably, someone will show up around 11. But if we can get the majority of people here at 10, we're going to have the service. And then right after the service, some will go down to Washington Park here and do the big candy scramble with the kids. And then some of us will start hauling food out to the pavilion. And eventually we'll all meet up there and just have an afternoon of good food and fun. Right now I think the weather's still supposed to be nice on Sunday. So just keep praying about that as well. But then after our activities, we'll come back here. I'm guessing it'll probably be around 4:30, and we'll do our evening service at that time. So don't really have a set time for the evening service, but we're going to shoot for around 4:30. And then Wednesday night, right back here for our midweek Bible study time. We have a whole pile of candy in my office. I'm sure when they look through the church on Friday, they're going to be wondering, what in the world? This preacher really has a sweet tooth. But had nowhere else to put it. It's just going to be piled in my office. But thank you for buying and helping out with that. I'm sure the kids will greatly appreciate it. We'll get that all sorted up on Saturday, and we'll get rid of it really quick. Carrie was asking me, what's the candy scramble all about? So I was trying to explain to her what the process was and how quick it is. But anyway, if you've never watched one, it can be a sight to see. So that will be one of the activities Sunday. And I think that's all the announcements I have, other than their sign-up sheet for the food on Sunday. And if you are wanting to bring something, you can look at that sheet and see what people have signed up for. And if you have a specialty that's not on the list, or even if it is on the list and you want to outdo somebody, that's okay with me. All right, so as long as we don't have 4 or 5 things, the same thing on the list. Now desserts, we can have 4 or 5 different pies, and I'd be okay with that. But anyway, looking forward to a wonderful day and the Lord's blessing upon us. Let's go ahead and take our course books again. Turn to number 82. Number 82, there's a new name in glory. Number 82. Benjamin, won't you come and pray for the offering before you take it up tonight?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us all to come together once again this Wednesday evening to hear from the preaching of your word. I pray that you just help us all to have our hearts open as we listen to the lesson tonight. I pray that you just help us all be able to glean much from your word. I just pray that you'd just bless this offering. Please bless it to Needs State Church. I just pray that you bless the gift and giver. In your name I pray. Amen.
let's go ahead and stand one last time. Turn to 221. 221. Fill my cup, Lord. 221. You may be seated. Get my helpers up here. All right, we have been looking at moral issues that we are confronted with as a Christian, and we've ran the gamut on topics, and we've got 4 or 5 more topics I want to look at, and tonight we're going to be looking at gambling. Gambling, you know, we're looking at gambling because it is a immoral or a moral issue that we are confronted with in today's society, and I think that is due a lot to the government allowing or sanctioning different types of gambling, whether it's through the state lotteries or whatever the case may be. So gambling has become easy access. And sadly, because of this, there's people that have adopted it or sanctioned it that really should never have, and it's been going on for quite some time. Before we get into gambling, can somebody give me what your idea of gambling is before I actually give you the definition? Gordon?
Betting on sports.
Okay. Betting on sports, that's a type of gambling, yes. Helen?
Giving up your money in a game of chance to try and get more money than you started with.
Okay, giving up your money in a game of chance to try to get more money than what you started with. Any other thoughts? All right, let me read you what the definition is according to Webster's. the wagering of money or something of material value, so it doesn't have to be money, on an event with an uncertain outcome with the primary intent of winning additional money and or material goods. So basically, it's you offering something to somebody and wagering against something in hopes that you can get more money in return or something else in return. You know, it's not such a big deal anymore, but I do know, it may be in some areas, but not around here. But I do know back in the 60s, the big things was, you know, I'll race you my car against your car for a pink slip. That's gambling. And, you know, so that was a big deal. And I know that in certain areas it still goes on today. But, you know, we need to understand that the outcome of these types of wagers is evident within a short period of time. It's not something that you're expecting to, you know, wait a year, 2, 10 years in order to draw this. It's something that you're hoping to get in a short period of time. The term gaming in the context that we're looking at refers to instances in which the activity that you're betting on has been specifically permitted by law. Horse racing, there's, you know, people that go down to the tracks and they'd race. Lottery is one of those things that's permitted by law. A lot of your gas stations have slot machines and different things in them now. These are the types of things that we're talking about. Sadly, and this is what I was talking about earlier, some religious organizations encourage gambling. Anybody have any idea what religious organizations would encourage gambling? Don't want to call any out? Helen? Okay, bingo in the basement. A lot of times they're wagering money. You know, they'll go in, they'll pay $10 for their 2 or 3 cards in hopes that they can earn more money back. That is gambling. But both the Catholic, and this one might surprise you, and Jewish traditions have traditionally set aside days for gambling. It's okay on certain days, but not on other days. So the 2 days that they do allow the gambling is another one that will blow your mind, and that is the Christian day of Christmas and the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Those are the 2 days that they would allow or approve gambling. So if the state, the government, and some religious organizations approve of gambling, what could be wrong with it, right? Well, that's what we want to look at tonight. So before supplying some answers, I want us to at first address, and this is going to our notes now, some arguments used to justify gambling. These are things that people will try to argue with you saying, it's okay because of this. So think about these things as we're going through them. And a lot of people want to say, well, isn't life a gamble? Every day you wake up, you don't know what's going to be happening that day. So just waking up in the morning, you're gambling with your life. I know that's a very broad statement, but how many has ever heard that statement used before? I've heard it used. Life is a gamble. I need somebody to read us Ecclesiastes 9:11. If you're not reading that and you want to thumb to the next one, you know, you can listen and go to the next one because I've got several verses that I want to try to stay on top of things tonight. But, you know, I heard some people say, you know, I really enjoy, you know, listening to other people read the Bible and reading them myself, you know, and so we're going to do that tonight. Just when you're reading, speak loudly enough to where some of the people at home can't hear it. Ecclesiastes 9:11. Somebody have that one, Helen?
I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all.
All right, time and chance. If you hear that word chance, a lot of times somebody may be referring to gambling. Well, it's a game of chance. If you want to pull this whole verse into context, if you go back to verse 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 9, it says, "For all this I considered in my heart, even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. No man knoweth either love or hatred by all that is before them." The writer here, he begins to, this is his thoughts. And as he begins with his thoughts, he goes through all of these what ifs. And we get down to our verse here in verse 11, and he says, "And I returned and saw under the sun." Now that term under the sun simply means that it's something that is repetitive. It's something that's done every day. So you wake up under the sun, so this is something that occurs often. That the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding. He's saying, you would think that life would typically fall into these categories. The person who's going to run the race is the swiftest one. But then you end up with a story like the turtle and the hare, right? It doesn't always happen that way. There's always circumstances that can pop up. And this is kind of the idea that he's giving. And then, but time and chance happeneth to them all. The turtle can win the race by chance. When we read this, Solomon, he says, time and chance happens to them all. Some people want to use this passage and say, well, we all gamble in life because time and chance happens to us all. Well, if we're going to be thinking that way, we've got to look at what the Bible has to say. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 19. 1 Corinthians 4:19. Somebody have that one? Would want to read it? Amber?
"And I will come to you shortly, if the Lord will know, but the speech of them which are puffed up with the power."
All right, so 1 Corinthians 4:19 says, "But I will come to you shortly, if the Lord will." And we know Paul is wanting to go to the Corinthian church. He's wanting to see them. He says, "And I want to come to you shortly, if the Lord wills it." Look at James chapter 4 and verse 15. James 4:15. Somebody want to read that one? Anyone? Yes, sir. Mr. Clausen.
For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that.
All right, so you ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. So when we look at these verses, life is not a gamble if we're doing it in the Lord's will. Now, Seth went to Hawaii and, not unbeknownst, but, let's say that he didn't do or follow his mother's wishes. He said, I'm going to go jump off a cliff in Hawaii because that's what you do, right? It wasn't a very high cliff, maybe from the ceiling. Was it about that high? Maybe a little bit higher. So it wasn't a real high cliff, but, just so he could say, I went cliff diving in Hawaii. Mom wasn't really keen on that because you don't know what's under the water and all these things. But being the rebellious son that he is, he had to take a video and send it to us. But some people jumping off of a 70-foot cliff may say, I'm going to jump, and if it's the Lord's will, I'll survive. Well, that's tempting God in one way. Another is kind of foolish. Now, there are professional cliff divers and things that do this, but just to use as a simple illustration, we need to make sure that the decisions and things that we make in our life, especially when it comes to monetary things and financial things, it's in the will of God. Because if you just have a whim to say, you know what, I'm going to get into the flipping houses business, and you've never built a day in your life, and you go down here and let's say the house across the street that has the signs in it, do not enter, and they're all boarded up and things, and you say, I can buy that house for $50,000. I'm just saying, don't do that. Somebody who's built. But you could say, I'm going to do this, and you go headstrong into it because you're going to flip it and you're going to make all kinds of money. And you not only lose your $50,000, but then you bought a bunch of material that you can't finish it with because there's a lot of work that would needing to be done on that house. And then you find yourself in the hole, $95,000, and it's not done or finished enough to sell it. Then it just sits there and falls apart before the city comes in and condemns it. How many has ever seen somebody start working on a project and never finish it because they didn't count the cost? And I'm sure they didn't pray about it. This is why we need to make sure that it's God's will before we jump into something. Some people say, well, farming is a gamble. And you think about that, they're spending money every year to put in crops and, hoping for a good harvest. And there's a lot of variables and things like that goes into this. So they take a risk when they go out to sow that seed, hoping to get something in return. But look at Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. Genesis 8:22. Roberta?
While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease.
God has promised us what? Seed time and harvest would not cease. Look at Psalm 104, verse 14. Dawn?
He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth.
All right, so he causeth the grass to grow for the cattle. Who's that? Who's the he? God does. Okay, so it says, God causeth the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man, that he, God, may bring forth food out of the earth. So farming is a honorable way for what? Of receiving God's blessings, because God has told us this is how we supply for our need. And God will take care of our need and he will supply it. Things look a little different today than they looked 200 years ago. Man grew their own crops and men grew their, they did their own planting and harvesting and things like that. Now we've got big corporations that own these farms that go out and mass produce all of these things. But nonetheless, farming is not gambling if it pertains to the activity of God. God has instituted or given us the okay, because that's how we sustain our needs. So life is a gamble, involves the will of God. Farming involves the activity of God. And then what about buying insurance? Caleb, you got something before we hop into that?
Yeah, just going to the farming side of it. That is a gamble if you aren't looking at it if the individual that's wanting to be a farmer doesn't, so say they are like, I want to get my yield really high, so I'm going to buy this bottomland that is known for flooding and doesn't take into account the possibility of his fields flooding, and he's just buying that because of high risk, high reward situation. Well, that's not being wise with his money.
Well, and that goes back to our first point. You can't make a decision on monetary things without knowing it being the will of God. If God would tell somebody, go ahead. The thing is, with bottomlands, you could have those bottomlands flood once every 10, 15 years. But those are the best areas as far as yield is concerned. But that's why you need to be praying and making sure it is, as a farmer, what God would want you to do. Again, and we're going to get into investing here in just a second, it's a long-term investment rather than a gamble in something like that, if it be the will of God. Seth?
And that's the difference between a risk and a gamble. You know you're going to get a product out of it. Now, should you be smart and plan ahead and say, okay, I'm going to save back this money because I know eventually I'm probably going to run into this situation and I don't want to like put myself out of business because I didn't prepare for this. You know, you have to take everything into account. Just
Right,
like you're
and
talking about flipping
a
houses.
smart farmer does that. You know, I grew up in a family of farmers. They get paid once a year, you know, but their paychecks are hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, and it's in the harvest time. That's when they get paid. So then they have to budget things out for the rest of the year. They got to budget out for the spring, the planting and the fuel and all those things that it's going to take and whatever it's going to take for them to live on. There's a lot of planning that goes into farming. And really it's a science that goes along with it. So typically gambling, according to our definition, is something that you're going into without a whole lot of thought, hoping to reap a whole lot of gain. So that's the difference, Caleb.
Well, and to finish my point that I was trying to make earlier was buying a piece of land, putting everything that they have into that piece of land where that is their only hope to be able to make a reward where they may possibly be able to, but they go into debt, and if they, or you know, they put everything they have in there, and if they don't make it there, then they're bankrupt.
Yeah,
You
that's
know, and-
foolish business.
Correct, but that is where, in that case, farming is a form of gambling.
Yeah, well, not farming itself, but that scenario with a farmer would be gambling. And that's the thing. You've got some people that can invest money. There's other people that want to try to yield a whole lot. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Buying insurance. Buying insurance is a gamble. This is something that has been brought up to me, probably, you know, Pastor Zdarsky, you know, playing the devil's advocate, you know, how he does. He's like, well, you know, why should I have to buy insurance? Isn't that gambling? I may never have to use it. And, but, you know, so that's the way some people will think in regards to it. But really, insurance is shifting your risk from one party to another. So if you purchase insurance for the purpose of a vehicle, it's required by law for one. Two, if you're in an accident, how many people have enough money sitting around to not only replace their vehicle, but to replace the other vehicle that they may have hit, plus pay for all the injuries that may have incurred as a result? That will bankrupt somebody really fast. So insurance really is an investment, and we'll get into that investment here in a second. But 1 Timothy 5:8. Judy?
But if any provides not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than infidelity.
Yeah, so it's important, according to this verse, for a husband, the head of the home, to provide for his family. This is an important duty of man, and insurance is a way to do that. Life insurance is a good way to do that. Now, I would not buy whole life. Whole life, you pay into it and say, well, you're actually going to get your money back. you're going to pay a whole lot more into a whole life insurance company for a $10,000 return. Term life, you know, depending on what age you are, if you're pretty young, you can get a $250,000 term life plan for probably $20 a month. What is, you're throwing your, if something were to happen to me, I would want to make sure that my wife and the children that are left in the home would be able to have enough to survive on. Again, that's me taking care of my family. So it's important for us to be having that mindset as far as taking care of them are concerned. So insurance, I don't believe, is a gamble when it's used to shift that high risk in order to provide for others. It's not that quick turnaround claim that you're trying to get through gambling. When our house got hit by a tornado, well, that was a quick turnaround because we bought insurance the month before the tornado hit our house and they covered everything. But we didn't plan on that. But you know, if we did not have insurance on our house, we would probably be homeless, or you know, have to get permission from the church to live in the basement of the church, because we would have lost, and we did lose everything, but the insurance company then was able to replace it. So it's important for us to make sure that these things are in place. Now investing. Investing is the one that a lot of people want to really grip their claws into as far as the gambling is concerned. It's not investing in business or the stock market. You know, they say, you know, when you invest in business or the stock market, it's a gamble. Not necessarily. It can be, if we're looking at a speculative or a significant risk. If it's a brand new business and somebody has a harebrained idea, your best friend comes up to you and say, hey, I want to start a business and you can get in on ground level. I just need $25,000 investment. The guy's never spent a day in business in his life. That's a risk. That's a gamble. Not advisable. Because you'll probably lose that $25,000. Mrs. Love would tell the story that her dad told me the story, that many years ago, he was asked to invest into a new store. And he went to Arkansas to look at this store because he was a doctor. He had money to invest in, but he's always making sure it's a sure investment. And he went and he looked at the store and said, this isn't going to go anywhere. And he backed out of it because he didn't think it was any different than a Kmart. It was Walmart. And it was Mr. Walton that had this big meeting and trying to get investors to invest in Walmart. Now, he would have been set for life if he would have invested ground level at Walmart. But that was too high of a risk for him. He didn't see it at that time. He didn't see Mr. Walton's vision, I guess, and he thought, this is no different than Kmart. I'm not going to do it. You know, and that's a wise man. If you're not comfortable in knowing that you're going to have a sure gain, then it's not an investment, or it's a risk. A good investment, and the thing is, even in good investments, you may eventually lose your money. Let's say that you have a 401k at work and they match your 401k. I believe that you should not rely on Social Security because that's basically the government has stolen our money, and you know, chances are some of us will never get it back. But if you depend on Social Security alone for retirement or your later years, you're not going to have enough to live on. So a good plan would be, okay, a Roth IRA, high yield savings accounts, mutual funds that will return your investment. They're very safe investments to make. you know, if the stock market crashes, your money's not worth anything that you'd have anyway, and you'd probably lose it. But it is a way to plan for your future, to put away for your future. So we're not going to take the time tonight, but Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, you know, we see Jesus telling the parable of the man leaving, you know, the talents with the three servants. And he gave each one of them according to their ability. In the first two, the one that had the 5, the one that had the 3, they invested it. And in his return, they got their investment back plus some. The one didn't do anything with it. He dug a hole, put it in the ground, and the Lord wasn't pleased with him. So it's okay, according to the scriptures and Jesus' teachings, to invest wisely. Just not to go out there and, you know, throw your money at anything that you may believe will return a yield. If you play the stock market, that's a high risk. I used to sell candy in high school, and the Board of Trade in Chicago was one of the buildings I'd go to. And I could sell $300 worth of candy in one afternoon if the stock market was good. You know, if they went down to the 4th floor of the Board of Trade, and that's where you see all these crazy people with the papers yelling and screaming and all these different things, it's just a sight to watch. But you go down there, and I've gone into some offices. A guy told me, he says, man, I made $850,000 today. Give me a case of it. I want to pass it out. Here you go. But then you'd go in there and you wouldn't sell anything because everybody's super mad because they just lost $900,000. But that's the stock market. It goes up, it goes down, up and down. It is not a safe investment. So you've got to be very careful. Investing is not a gamble if it's done prudently. Benjamin.
Yeah, I would just think of investing as if you go out and buy a car and you buy that car and the next day that car crash and burn, would you be out all that money and would your life change any without the money that you lost in that car?
Yeah,
The same thing would happen in investing, the money that you invest in the stock market or whatever you invest in. If you lost that money within a matter of minutes, would your life change any without that money, pretty much?
Yeah. Seth?
Well, and I don't necessarily think that's a great example because the whole point of all this is that just because you have extra doesn't mean that you should go out and go to the boat and spend it and be like, well, you know, if I lose it, I lose it, because if that's how you treat your extra money that God's given you, he might just take it away from you because you're not being a good steward. And that's what the difference between gambling and investing is one, you are taking somewhat of a risk, but it's a smart investment. You know, there are ways to go into the stock market, and I can't remember what the type of investment is called, but there are a lot of investments where you're really putting an amount of money into like 20 different businesses, and it's a low yield.
That's a mutual fund.
Yes, a mutual fund. And you're probably going to get like 3 or 4% back from it. So it's not a high yield, but it's a very safe investment,
Right.
because they're not all going to go down at the same time. But if you put all your money on Walmart, well, it might fluctuate, it might go up and down. And so it all comes down to what is the risk whenever you are looking at it and being a good steward and saying, okay, I think this is a smart investment. I don't think there's a lot of risk to it, and I don't think there's any problem with that. And that's the difference between that and gambling. It's not necessarily whether or not you would be hurting if you lost the money. It's whether or not it's a good decision to be making.
Yeah. If you get a good investor that knows how things work, like I said before, IRAs, high yield savings accounts, and mutual funds are the only 3 things that I would ever put my money in. Just because everything else would be too high of a risk for me. Trevor?
And the Bible does talk about risk. And I mean, in the passage that you just mentioned about the stewards, that the master would have rather the steward put a little bit of risk toward what he had given him with the chance to gain than do nothing with it. And obviously we know that that's a parable regarding our talents and that we shouldn't sit on the talents that God has given to us. But finances are the same thing. You know, they're a gift that's been given to us of God. I mean, however you want to look at it, whether it's giving money to a Christian charity, because even though that you're not ever going to see that money again, it's going to be of use to somebody else. Or whether it's investing it, you know, in something so that the return you then have extra that you can, you know, give of your tithe or whatever the case is. But the Bible, in everything that we do, whether action, whether, you know, risk taken, whether money earned, nothing should stay stagnant. It should
Right.
all be working, because that's what we're here to do, is
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah, and we're going to be covering some of that in our arguments against gambling. So let's move on here, because we've got quite a bit to still go through. What are some of the arguments against gambling? Well, when you think of the principle that you're applying when it comes to your so-called investments or your gambling or whatever it is that you're doing, are these things sinful in principle alone? Ephesians 4:28. Who'd like to read that one? Ephesians 4:28. Miss Judy?
Let him that steal no more, but rather him labor, working with his hands, that the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that is needed.
Somebody had told me once that the smartest investment that you can make, and I'd have to say the second smartest investment you can make, is working a job. Because if you can work a job and get paid $20, $25 an hour, you're investing 1 hour of time for a sure $25. So that's the best investment you can make. You say, or the second best. What's the best investment you can make? Any ideas, Caleb?
Our time for God.
Our time for God. Financially, it's our tithe to God, because it is God's commanding us. You say, that's 10%. God is telling us, I'm giving you 100% of what you have. I'm just asking for 10% of that back. And if you're faithful in doing that with a cheerful heart, you'll get a return on that investment. That's just a biblical principle. So just throwing that out there, not part of my notes. 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 11 and 12. 1 Thessalonians 4, 11 and 12. Trevor?
And that you study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you, that ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may lack of nothing.
All right, so in reading these verses, I think sometimes we get to a place where we're desperate and we look for these get-rich-quick schemes. And that's what they are. These pyramid businesses and different things like that. You'd think, it makes a lot of sense. And if I could just give, $10, and send it to somebody, and then those people send me $10, and then, in a week I could have $100,000 in my pocket. No, you're not. It's a scheme. So you've got to be very careful with these types of things, because in and of itself, it is not a good principle. It really, going back to the stewardship, it violates any kind of stewardship ethics that we're looking at. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 13 through 14, it says, Now therefore, our God, we thank thee and praise thy glorious name, but who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able to offer so willingly after this sort? For all things come of thee, and of thine own have we given thee. we looked at this when we're talking about finances, a Christian and their finances. Everything that we have comes from God. Everything. He's given you the health to work your job. He's given you, the opportunity to go and apply for that job, to do an interview, to be able to get hired onto that job. Everything that we have, our cars, God's given us either, from that job, and we're able to go out and purchase that, or whatever it is. There's nothing that you can think of under the sun that God has not given us. He gives us the air to breathe. He gives us everything that we have. So we need to realize that all things come from God. Now, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. Benjamin?
Really quickly, you had mentioned that the second greatest investment that we can make is our job. Would you consider a 100% commission job a gamble or a risk?
It's a gamble. Because if you're working a 100% commission job, that means that the economy has to be perfect and people have to want to buy the product that you're selling. If there's a recession that takes place and nobody's getting a paycheck, or people's lifestyle starts to get, people aren't going to go out and buy brand new cars and things. Back in the 70s, early 80s, many of you that were around, you can remember during the Jimmy Carter era that interest rates went up to 18-19%. Gas prices went up. Nobody was buying anything new because it was just too expensive. You couldn't afford it. So if you're working a commission job and you run into something like that, where's your income? You don't have one. So that's a really high risk. Now, if you're working a job where they pay you a salary plus you can get commission on top of that, not as much of a risk. So, let's see. Did I have somebody want 1 Peter 4:10? Did we read that one? Is somebody there? Yes, sir, Mr. Clausen.
As every man hath received the gift, even so minister the same one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God.
We are going to have to give account for all of our stewardship. That which God has given to us, we are going to be held accountable for. So it's important for us to understand that we need to make sure that we're doing things that don't violate the principles of stewardship in the Bible. God has given it to us. He wants us to invest our time, our talents, our efforts, whatever it is, wisely. And He promises that He will take care of us and meet our needs along the way. But people gamble for a quick buck. That's the whole idea behind gambling. And they're really willing to risk what is not their own in doing so. So we see the principle is sinful. The motivation behind it. The motivation behind gambling is sinful. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 through 10. Helen?
They that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men into destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
Why do the majority of people gamble? One word. Greed. Greed. Their desire to be rich, according to this verse, leads to foolish and harmful lusts and destruction. When people take their money and they gamble it away because they're greedy and they want more and more and more, they're going to lose more and more and more. and what's going to happen eventually, their love of money is going to really lead to the loss of their faith in God, and it's going to lead to a lot of sorrows in their life because of things that they lost as a result of their gambling addiction. I've seen somebody's hand raised. Judy?
You said they're in addiction, and that breaks up homes and stuff
Yeah.
like that when they get gambling.
Yeah, I mean, and it is an addiction, and it can become an addiction, and I'll share something that will explain that here shortly. Ephesians 5, 3 through 7. Ephesians 5, 3 through 7. Anyone? Go ahead, Helen. I know you're looking around. She's like, I don't want to read all the verses tonight.
Okay, but fornication and all uncleanness and covetousness, let it not be one stained among you as becometh saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. For this ye know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. Be not ye therefore partakers with them.
That was it.
That was it, okay.
You know, so as we read through this verse, I mean, it's giving a lot of information, and I don't have time to go through each and every one of these things. But in verse 5, it says, For this ye know that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man. People gamble because of covetousness. They're greedy, and they're coveting things that they don't have. Well, if I could just if I could win me $100,000, man, I could buy the car of my dreams. They're coveting, and this is a sinful act. They'll bring, according to these verses, the wrath of God upon them. And you know, I used to go to Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, and there are people that were in there that, you know, would tell you, you know, I used to be an attorney, I was an accountant, but I lost my money, I lost my wife, I lost my children. A lot of it was due to alcohol, but a few of them would say, I gambled my money away, and it drove me to drinking, because that's all they had left. So it's one of these things that will bring destruction to them. Colossians 3, 5 through 6. Trevor?
Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience.
All right, if we're disobedient to God, again, here's the wrath of God that comes upon us. We read 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10 earlier, but verse 11 says, But thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. People gamble because they want to be rich. That's a desire that we're supposed to flee. Because if we desire to be rich, it's a love of money. Not to say that investing and putting away for your future is wrong, but our whole desire of life should not to be a multimillionaire. If God allows you to put back and you become a multimillionaire, you know, God uses multimillionaires. You know, there's a guy that, Mr. Kanega was a business owner, had several businesses that went to the church that I grew up in. And, you know, when he passed away, his wife passed away before he did, and when he died, he pretty much left everything to the church. They were able to build a big old gymnasium and a library and all these different things as a result of it, and it became a tremendous blessing to the church. So being rich isn't sinful, but allowing the love of riches, that's what becomes sinful. Romans 15, verses 1 and 2, and I'm going to read through the rest of these simply because we're out of time. But it says, "We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification." When we begin to gamble our lives away, it takes advantages of others' weaknesses. Or when we gamble, what are they doing? The people who own these joints are taking advantage of other people's weaknesses. Because the house is always going to win. Certain people may go in there and they may come out, with a few $1,000s more than they went in. But the house, talking about, where their gambling joint is, they're always going to come out on top because that's how they stay in business. The odds are not in your favor. That's why it's a gamble. But when we begin to exploit others or we extort money for our own advantage, what are we doing? Well, we're taking advantage of others. Let me ask you this. Do gamblers really care about other people, their feelings, their desires, their wants? No, it's all about putting money in their pocket and trying to get more back for them. That goes against the Christian principles, the desires that God has for us. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, it says, "Be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners." And Ephesians 5:11 says, "Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them." It leads to really unsavory companions. You hang around gambling joints, you go down and play, in the poker games and all these different things, wherever they do that around. I don't even know if they do that around here, but a lot of those people probably aren't the best people to be hanging around. Unsavory. Others who are motivated by greed, covetousness, that's who you'd be hanging around. Those quick to take advantage. You ever hear of a bookie or a loan shark? Their whole life is taking advantage of others. Those are the type of unsavory characters that you'd be hanging out with. Again, as we mentioned earlier, it leads to addiction. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19 says, "While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. For of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought in bondage." You go out and you gamble. Psychologically and physically, it can become addictive. There was a study by a man by the name of Hans Breiter. He had an MD, co-director of the Motivational of Emotion Neuroscience Center of Massachusetts General Hospital. He said this: "Monetary reward in gambling, like experiment, produces brain activation very similar to that observed in a cocaine addict receiving an infusion of cocaine." So it triggers this gambling in gambling addict will trigger these senses in the brain, and it's the same senses being triggered as a cocaine addict getting his high on. Very addictive. So gambling is something that once you turn on, you may not be able to shut off. And this is what's so dangerous with it. And not only that, but it also leads to other sins. Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23 says, "For from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man." As debts begin to build up, and this is how a lot of this starts, people turn to other quick sources of money. Usually, a thief steals because they're covetous They're greedy and they want something that they don't have. Whether that's more money, whether it's a stereo out of your car, or whether it's your car. They don't care. They're going to take it. And sadly, suicide is very common, along with abuse, divorce, other kind of mental disorders that go along with a gambling addict. People who gamble, they don't consider how they're going to hurt themselves, or more importantly, how they hurt others. Well, I'm just playing a game. What's that game lead to? How far is that game going to take you? I see people going into these convenience stores and buying milk and stuff on their EBT card, but they're buying $20 worth of scratch-off tickets. What are they doing? Well, if I could just get this, Mega Millions or whatever it is, man, my whole life would change. A lot of the people that win the Mega Millions, they're dirt poor within 3 years. Statistically, they don't know how to handle the money. They just go out and they just start buying and buying and buying because they think, man, this is going to last me forever. And it's gone. This is what greed will do. It will leave you poor. So I close with this thought. Which is gambling more like? The works of the flesh or the fruit of the Spirit? It feeds the works of the flesh, because it really has nothing to do with the fruits of the Spirit. When you look at the works of the flesh, Galatians 5:19 says the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. So there's a whole lot of things here that you could associate with a gambler. Fruits of the Spirit we find in verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith. You're not going to find much of that when it comes to a person who gambles. So are we a person of the flesh or a person of the Spirit? And when we start to think about the spiritual aspect of gambling, it can only lead one way, and that is toward the spiritual. So again, there's people that want to argue these things. But if they really want to look to see what the Bible has to say about it, their arguments are going to fall short. Comments or questions in regards to gambling this evening? All right. A lot of comments in between. Yes, Mr. Clausen.
Well, I'm thinking of as gambling. If I were to, as far as lotteries go, I wouldn't want a lottery because the guy who put his money, it could be he's giving his last dollar for his meal. Or the guy that comes in and is a greedy guy. We just mentioned that all those are going for it. I don't want that kind of money if they're greedy or they're poor, or what am I doing helping out these people?
Mhm.
So, gambling, it's far from what we should be.
Yeah, and you can look at these gambling laws and stuff. Let's use lottery, since you brought it up as an example. What did they sell everybody on when it came to the lottery and approving the lottery, voting it in, Helen?
They're still doing it, they're doing it again. We're gonna give education more
Yeah.
money.
Education's going to get more money. About 5% of the lottery money goes to the schools, the educations. The rest of it either goes to paying out those who win it or paying for everybody who works there. They're saying the same thing in regards now because they're trying to pass, the sports gambling. Oh, so much money is going to go toward education. No, it's not. When somebody is trying to sell you something and they're lying as a result of it, it's not something that is pleasing to God. Judy?
You said part of it. I had got a text from a teacher from St. Louis Republican Party, how she got my number, I don't know, didn't answer it either, but she had mentioned on there that she's trying to reach as many Missourians to tell them to say no on that, on the voting, because it's not gonna help the Missouri, it's gonna be helping Illinois. She said all that money's gonna be going across the border, or next state.
Yeah. Seth?
And really, if you look at states where they do legalize stuff like that, all it turns into is more homeless people ending up on the streets, more people pulling from EBT and things like that, because they gamble all their money away that goes to the government, and that money it goes to things that, like you said, doesn't go to the schools or things like that, and they siphon more money off of taxpayers to help the homeless who were in that position because they couldn't control their finances, and it just creates this dependent system.
Right, yeah. Benjamin?
Yeah, just go off of that, that's why gambling, I mean, that's why the government is so for gambling, because say you win $3 million jackpot, how much of that's gonna be going toward taxes?
50%.
Because the taxes that you have to pay off of gambling are so astronomical. You're handing out 3/4 or 50% of your winnings to the government.
Right.
And of course, they can use that however they want to. So that's why it's so common, especially, and so encouraged by
Right.
the higher ups is
Yeah.
to give them more money.
Gordon?
Well, I hate to tell you, but I've gambled a lot over the years playing pool. And I've made money, I've lost money. I've made more than I lost, thank God. But yeah, I've been playing pool for 45 years.
Right. But it's,
There's a lot of competition out there.
right, it's a risk.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're gonna win, you don't know if you're gonna lose. And the thing is, that people will get into that and it will become an absolute addiction. Golfing could be the very exact same way. You know, if these people that get into the, PGA and things, I mean, they're putting out $100,000, $200,000 to play around. Of course, they could make $1 million if they're top players or contender. And a lot of them have sponsors that pay those fees for them, just to get their name, Nike or whatever, out there. But it's one of those things where a lot of people, it just eats them up and they can't control it, and it becomes a bigger and a bigger and a bigger problem. Seth?
It's a lot of extra work for me too. Like, I don't know, these people that gamble, I had a lady send me over 500 1099 G's for gambling. Like, she came across, and she wasn't even a citizen in Missouri, but she came over here and she gambled every single day, and every time she'd go to a different casino and they'd give her a different 1099 every single time. We had to look at every single one of those. That's horrible.
Yeah. So, Ms. Golden?
Just like kind of how you put it about with the tithing, that's really the beginning of our being wise investors, because God's return is always going to be huge on.
It's a sure investment.
It is. It's a sure investment, and the return is great. And I think that also just helps to set our focus. It sets our mindset of, okay, I am being obedient to God with the tithe, and then that helps me to hopefully be wise with what, is left after tithing, and to be more mindful of, what I'm doing with
Right.
what God has given me, to be a steward of what's left.
I mean, I've been pastoring long enough now to see where there have been people years ago that, part of our church that, they struggled. They were living in the poorhouse, wondering where their next meal was. And, we were there on occasion. But we're going to do what God told us to do and tithe. And those people that I'm thinking of that have been faithfully giving throughout the years are sitting better off than, you'd look at them and you'd think they're upper middle class. But it's just because God has blessed them throughout the years because of their faithfulness. So I can say for sure, because it's happened to us, and that's why I said that is the best investment, because God has put us in a position now that I never thought or expected us to be in, you know, as far as the house we live in, the vehicles that we drive, and you know, different things like that. And it's not because we make a ton of money, it's just because God has done things for us throughout the course of the years. I mean, God sent that tornado to take away everything so the insurance company could give us better. I would go to my grave believing that, because we've been faithful, and God takes care of the faithful. So we're going to stop with that because it's getting late. We've got some things to straighten up, and we've got to take some prayer requests tonight.